Okay, so today we're going to epoxy a hood, and here's a few materials that we're going to need: wax and grease, paintbrush, cup, OSPO, D8, and a angle grinder with the little roll-lock disc on it. With this type of epoxy that we're going to be using, it has some strict kind of guide rules. We have a few rock chips on the hood that do need a little bit of acid put on. So we're going to do that and then acid etch it out. So yeah. Alright, this hood's already been painted before, so we're going to we strip most of it down. The rest of it is okay. You don't really need to strip it always down to the bare metal if you don't need to. Sometimes it's recommended, but with this epoxy sticks to 80 grit, and any oils and any rusts and any contaminants need to be taken care of first. If you have an area that I'm gonna have to grind out right here and then sand it with 80. I don't think it's rust areas, but we're just gonna hit the little chips. There's little rock chips, and it's not a big deal. This is for an F250, but customer paying a lot for it. So we want to make sure it's right and lasts a long time. You can do the whole hood if you want, but we're just going to hit the areas that's obviously got some issues and rust on it. With OSPO, you'll know it's working because it starts foaming up. Once it does that, it's starting to dry. You don't really want to, you're not supposed to put it necessarily thick, but you want it to stay on there for a little bit. Now, it's funny because OSPO will tell you two different things. It says to let it sit for 24 hours, and then you can wipe it off, and then sometimes they'll tell you to apply it for 15 minutes and then wipe it off with a wet cloth to neutralize it. I don't know, there's so many different ways. I've used this before on restoration jobs and I haven't had an issue. I just let it wait for 24 hours. This we're gonna let speed up a little bit more because we need to epoxy this today. So make sure you have, when you epoxy something, you're basically putting down the glue and the solid foundation that's going to sit on the paint. Your paint job's going to sit on. So if you want to do something quality, you want to make sure it looks pretty good. There's a weird little area right here. I didn't like what it looked like. It almost looked like aluminum corrosion. This is actually still a steel hood. So I like to use a little roll-lock because it's soft on the metal and it's not too abrasive. To basically just grind out the issue area and then come back and I'm gonna wipe some OSPO on it. I'm just gonna let it sit for a few minutes. Probably about 15, but you don't have to do this. I want to make sure all the rust is taken care of. OSPO takes the rust and turns it into iron, but I'm going to come back with a roll-off just a little bit and just hit all these little rock chip rust areas just to kind of make sure it cleans it out. Because I just don't like looking at rust and then priming over it. itch a little bit. Just a little added protection since it kind of grinded it out. And, you can do this several different ways, but when I've done it this way, I haven't had an issue later on, so I like doing it.
It's the Norris way.
You're gonna let this sit for about, I'm just gonna let it sit for 15 minutes today, and then I'm gonna come back with a wet rag and then just basically neutralize the acid. I've gotta let it sit for probably about 30 minutes after I wax and grease this area. I'm gonna go back over it with 80 grit for this epoxy to stick. But when I wax and grease the product that I'm using, I have to let the panel sit for 30 minutes after you wax and grease it to, I guess, ventilate the solvent out of it, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so let it sit for 15 minutes, and we're coming back with the neutralized coat. I wiped it one more time with the brush for 5 minutes. You let that sit. That's supposed to reverse it, and then you come back with a clean terry cloth. I already kind of wiped some of it with water to neutralize it. And you just basically wipe it off, and wash it off in a sense. And that's where the water bottle comes in handy. I feel weird putting water on bare metal like this, but we're gonna wipe it immediately. Granted, it still has a funky look to it. What I'm gonna do though, we'll come back on these specs for it. I'm gonna come back with 80 grit and just buzz over it, just to make you feel comfortable. You don't have to necessarily do that. I'm kind of doing Osco a little bit different than I normally would. I would just usually put it on there, let it sit over 24 hours, and that's it. But we're kind of in a rush. We do need to spray this today. So that's what we're gonna do. Putting off an odd smell. Smells like baby poo-poo. Wash it off and then dry it off real good, obviously. And then I'm going to come back with the wax and grease remover. And then after we wax and grease it, we're going to let it sit for 30 minutes. But first I'm going to deate it, and then we'll go back. I'm going to flash dry it if you're in a colder temperature right now, which we are. You notice it's turning white. That's good because it's kind of like oxidizing it in a sense. It's like a protective film. That's good though, that's where you want to be. Technically, you could go straight over this with epoxy, but I think they went over it with 180 a little bit, but it specifically says for this epoxy, you have to read the information guide on it, but this one has to be 80 grit. That's what it wants to adhere to. So I'm gonna go over it just a little bit. sanded a lot more, but we've already sanded most of it. We're gonna come back, wax and grease it, wipe it out, detack it if you want to, let it sit for 30 minutes, and then we're gonna come back with the epoxy. All right, wax and grease, remove some of this other stuff real quick, make sure everything's good and slick. You could actually cut out a few of these steps if you have everything 80 grit already. Literally, you can come back after you have the bare metal 80 grit. You can osmo it like I did, let it sit for 15 minutes, then come back and then re-wipe it, put one more layer on it, and then after that 5 minutes, come back with a wet rag and wash it off. And then you can wax and grease, and then you're ready to just go ahead and spray. So I did a little bit different, but it's because I didn't like the fineness of the sanding that was already done, so I kind of just went back over from one of my guys. We're good to go. We're going to go mix the epoxy and then let it sit for 30 minutes. It has an induction period on this one. Make sure you read all this stuff because some of them are very picky, and if you don't do it right, you can mess up your whole paint job and you won't know until later on. Okay, so we already did the acid. We already cleaned the panel with wax and grease, so now we're going back with the epoxy. The epoxy sat for an induction period for 30 minutes. Your product might be different, always read the books. And then now we're gonna spray. I'm gonna do like one coat, maybe two, but I just want a good sealer kind of on it, and then we're gonna do the body work on it.